240 million people, around 170 nuclear warheads, and the national treasury that has run so empty so many times that the country has now gone begging to the International Monetary Fund for a bailout 25 separate times. This is Pakistan. On paper, it is the most powerful Muslim-majority nation on the planet, the only one with the bomb, the second largest by population, a founding heavyweight of the Islamic world, a country that likes to call itself the Fortress of Islam. And in May of 2025, this fortress came within a few bad decisions of a nuclear exchange with India, while its own government was surviving week to week on borrowed money. Here is the uncomfortable part. The thing dragging Pakistan toward the edge is not bad luck. It is not drought or some shadowy foreign enemy or bad weather. It is a choice. The same choice made over and over for almost 80 years. And because of what Pakistan is and where it sits, the day that choice finally breaks the country, it will not break quietly. The shockwave will tear straight through the entire Muslim world. Before we get into how a nuclear power talked itself into near bankruptcy, do one quick thing. Hit subscribe. This channel breaks down the economic collapses and military disasters that the history books rush right past. And what is happening in Pakistan right now is one you do not want to miss the next chapter of. Now, let's get into it. To understand why this matters far beyond one country's borders, you first have to understand what Pakistan actually is to the rest of the Muslim world. There are 50-something Muslim-majority countries on Earth. Most of them are small or poor or both. A handful are rich because they are sitting on oceans of oil, but only one of them is a nuclear-armed state with a population north of 200 million and a full-spectrum military built to fight a major war. That country is Pakistan. When it was created in 1947, it was sold as a homeland, a place carved out of British India specifically so that the subcontinent's Muslims could have a nation of their own. That founding idea gave Pakistan a role it has never let go of. It sees itself not just as a country, but as a leader, a protector, the armed spear point of the Islamic world. And there is real weight behind that self-image. Pakistan is a heavyweight in the Organization of Islamic Cooperation. Its soldiers have trained forces across the Gulf and the Middle East. When people talk nervously about a Muslim bomb, they are talking about Pakistan's arsenal. For decades, the Gulf monarchies have quietly treated Islamabad as the muscle they could call on if things ever got truly desperate. There is a reason the phrase Muslim bomb ever entered the conversation. When Pakistan tested its nuclear weapons in 1998, it was celebrated in parts of the Islamic world as a milestone, proof that a Muslim nation could stand technologically toe-to-toe with any power on Earth. That pride was real, and it attached the prestige of a fifth of humanity to one country's arsenal. It also meant that Pakistan's failures would never be read as just Pakistan's failures. Fairly or not, the country made itself a symbol, and symbols cannot fall without everyone who believed in them feeling it. So this is not just another struggling economy. This is a keystone. Pull it out of the arch, and a lot of other things start to move. Keep that in your mind, because everything that follows only becomes terrifying once you accept how central this one country is. Now, the origin of the problem. And it starts on the very first day. Pakistan was born in violence. The partition of 1947 killed hundreds of thousands and displaced millions. And it left the new country locked in a blood feud with a much larger, much richer neighbor. From that first morning, one idea took hold in Pakistan's leadership and never let go. India is the eternal threat, and survival depends on being strong enough to face it. That sounds reasonable. A young country next to a giant rival wants a strong army. The trouble is what that logic did over the following decades. It did not just build an army. It let the army swallow the state. By 1958, the military had taken over the government outright. The country's first field marshal, Ayub Khan, gave himself that 5-star rank in 1959. And for most of the years since, Pakistan has been run either directly by generals or by civilian leaders who serve at the general's pleasure. The military became the one institution that actually worked, and so it grew until it was bigger than the country it was supposed to protect. Then, in 1965, Pakistan gambled on a war with India over Kashmir and came away with nothing but a bloody stalemate. That should have been the warning. It was not. Because 6 years later came the catastrophe that should have rewritten everything and somehow changed almost nothing. In 1971, Pakistan tore itself in half. At the time, the country had two wings separated by 1,000 miles of hostile Indian territory. West Pakistan, where the army and the elite lived, and East Pakistan, which was poorer, more populous, and treated like a colony. When the Eastern Wing voted for autonomy, the generals in the West answered with a brutal military crackdown. India intervened, and the result was one of the most humiliating military defeats in modern history. The Pakistani army in the East collapsed. On the 16th of December, 1971, roughly 93,000 Pakistani soldiers surrendered. It was the largest military surrender since the Second World War. East Pakistan became the independent nation of Bangladesh. In a single stroke, Pakistan lost more than half its population and a huge chunk of its economy. The scale of it is hard to overstate. In under 2 weeks of open war, the vision of a single unified Muslim homeland stretching across the subcontinent was gone for good. Tens of thousands were dead. Millions had fled across the border as refugees. And the professional army that had justified its grip on power by promising security had instead delivered the greatest territorial and human loss in the country's history. This was not a defeat at the hands of some overwhelming superpower. It was a wound the leadership had inflicted on itself through arrogance, through contempt for its own Eastern citizens, and through the belief that force could always substitute for fairness. Sit with that for a second. The country's entire reason for existing was the claim that only a powerful centralized state, guarded by a powerful army, could keep Muslims safe. And that same army had just presided over the country, literally splitting in two. A rational state would have taken a hard look in the mirror. It would have asked whether pouring everything into the military and letting generals run the show was actually keeping people safe, or just keeping the generals in charge. Pakistan did not ask that question. Instead, it doubled down. It chased the nuclear bomb, got it by the late 1990s, and told itself the answer to every failure was more strength, more weapons, more confrontation. And this is where the economic disaster begins, because all of that strength has to be paid for by a country that has never figured out how to pay for anything. Here's the pattern that has defined Pakistan's economy for 50 years, and once you see it, you cannot unsee it. Pakistan spends far more than it earns. Its tax base is tiny because the powerful, the landowners, the generals, the industrialists mostly do not pay. It imports far more than it exports, especially energy. It props up its currency and subsidizes fuel and electricity to keep the public calm. And to plug the gap, it borrows. When the borrowing gets too big and the foreign reserves run dry, it goes to the International Monetary Fund, takes a bailout, promises reforms, gets a little breathing room, and then quietly goes right back to the same behavior, 25 times. That is how many IMF programs Pakistan has entered. 25 bailouts, and it is still broke. Each rescue buys time, and each time the country burns through that time without fixing anything real. Analysts who study this call it a cycle of dependency, and the brutal truth is that the crisis was never really about reserves. It was about resolve, the willingness to actually change, and that willingness never came. Take just one piece of it, energy, and you can see the self-sabotage up close. For decades, Pakistan built its power system around expensive imported fuel, signing deals with private power producers that guaranteed them payment whether the country needed the electricity or not. It sat on top of one of the largest coal reserves in the world at Thar, discovered back in 1991, and largely left it in the ground while it shipped in furnace oil at global prices. When oil prices spiked, and they always eventually spike, the whole system buckled. Import bills exploded, the currency sank, and reserves drained away. Then came the circular debt, a spiral of unpaid bills running through the entire power sector that no government has ever managed to break. Many of Pakistan's earlier bailouts came during exactly these kinds of energy-driven shocks. The country kept building the same trap and kept walking into it. By early 2023, the cycle almost ended the only way it eventually can: in default. The government's foreign reserves fell below $4 billion, barely enough to cover 2 weeks of imports. 2 weeks, a nuclear-armed nation of over 200 million people was 2 weeks from not being able to buy fuel and food from abroad. Inflation that spring hit almost 38%, the highest ever recorded in the country's history. Ordinary families watched the price of flour and cooking oil double while they waited in line for basics. On the streets, this was not an abstraction about reserves and ratios. It was mothers rationing meals. It was factories going dark because there was no foreign currency to import raw materials. It was crowds crushing together during handouts of subsidized flour, with people injured and some killed in the stampedes, fighting over a sack of wheat in a country that calls itself a nuclear power. That is what a balance of payments crisis actually looks like when it finally reaches the kitchen table. The cost of just servicing the country's debt had grown so enormous, it was eating up nearly 2/3 of all government revenue. Think about what that means. For every 100 rupees the state collected, 60-something went straight out the door just to pay interest on money already borrowed. There was almost nothing left for schools, hospitals, or roads. Pakistan pulled back from the ledge, as it always does, with another IMF program, a $7 billion arrangement, its latest lifeline. By 2026, inflation had cooled to around 7%, and reserves had crawled back to somewhere between $14 and $17 billion. The government called it a recovery. But look closer. Those reserves still cover only about 3 months of imports, and the country's external financing needs, the money it has to find just to stay afloat, are projected to climb toward $100 billion by the end of the decade. That is not a recovery. That is a patient sitting up in the hospital bed and being told they are cured, while still hooked to every machine in the room. And the debt itself tells a darker story than the headline numbers. A huge share of what Pakistan owes is domestic, borrowed from its own banks at brutal interest rates, which means the government is quietly cannibalizing its own financial system just to keep the lights on. The rest is owed abroad, to the IMF, to China, to the Gulf states, to bondholders who charge a premium because they know exactly how risky this borrower is. Every new loan makes the next crisis more expensive to escape. It is the financial version of running faster and faster just to stay in the same place, and eventually, everyone who runs that race collapses. So why does Pakistan keep doing this? Why, after 25 bailouts and one lost war after another, does nothing change? To answer that, you have to talk about who actually runs the country. Officially, Pakistan is a democracy. It has a president, Asif Ali Zardari. It has a prime minister, Shehbaz Sharif. It has a parliament and elections. But almost everyone who studies Pakistan honestly will tell you the same thing. The real power sits in the army, in an institution people simply call the establishment. The military does not just defend Pakistan, it is arguably the largest business empire in the country. Through a web of foundations and companies, it runs everything from cement and fertilizer to cereal, real estate, and banking. Its retired officers get prime land. Its budget is close to untouchable. Analysts estimate the military's commercial interests stretch across dozens of businesses and vast holdings of the country's most valuable real estate, making the armed forces not just the guardian of the economy, but one of its biggest players inside it, and an institution that, profitable, has every reason to keep things exactly as they are. Reform, real reform, is not only a threat to the country's enemies, it is a threat to the balance sheet of the men holding the guns. When civilian leaders get too popular or too independent, they have a strange habit of being removed, jailed, or worse. You saw this play out in real time. Imran Khan, the cricket star turned prime minister, was pushed out of office and then buried under a mountain of legal cases and imprisoned in a saga almost everyone understood as a collision with the establishment. The message to any future civilian leader was clear. The generals decide who governs, and here is why that matters for the economy. The reforms Pakistan actually needs are exactly the reforms that would threaten the establishment: taxing the rich and the powerful, cutting the military's privileges, shrinking the sprawling business empire, making generals answer to voters. No general is going to volunteer for that. So the reforms never happen, the borrowing continues, and the country stays trapped. The people running Pakistan are not incompetent. They are protecting themselves and letting the country pay the bill. Which brings us to 2025 and the single most dangerous decision in this entire story. In April of 2025, gunmen massacred 26 civilians, most of them tourists, at Pahalgam in Indian-administered Kashmir. India blamed militant groups it says are based in and backed by Pakistan. Islamabad denied involvement, but the region was already a tinderbox, and this was the match. On the night of the 6th and 7th of May, 2025, India launched Operation Sindoor. Indian jets and missiles struck what India called terrorist infrastructure at 9 locations inside Pakistan and Pakistani-administered Kashmir. Pakistan said the strikes hit civilians and mosques and killed innocent people. Over the next 4 days, 2 nuclear-armed nations traded airstrikes, missiles, and drones in the most serious military confrontation between them in decades. Pakistan launched its own operation in response with a name meaning a wall of lead. What actually happened in the air is still fiercely disputed, and you should be skeptical of anyone claiming certainty. Pakistan said it shot down multiple Indian jets, including advanced French-built fighters, and some independent reporting supported at least part of that claim. India said it struck deep and hard, hit Pakistani air bases, and forced Pakistan to ask for a stop. Both governments flooded the internet with claims and counterclaims. What is not disputed is the direction it was heading, toward the unthinkable. 2 arsenals of nuclear weapons, 2 furious militaries, and a handful of days between a border clash and a catastrophe that would have killed millions. It ended on the 10th of May with a ceasefire, reportedly brokered with heavy American pressure. And in the middle of all this, while the shooting was still fresh, the IMF approved another billion-dollar disbursement to Pakistan, a detail that infuriated observers who noted the country was receiving a financial rescue at the exact moment it was locked in armed conflict. India also threatened to suspend the Indus Waters Treaty, the decades-old agreement that governs how the 2 countries share the rivers Pakistan's farmland depends on. For a nation where agriculture feeds the population and drives much of the export economy, the mere suggestion that the water could be choked off was its own kind of weapon, one aimed straight at the food on people's plates. A single week of fighting had frozen trade, grounded flights, spooked investors, and reminded the world just how fast Pakistan's fragile recovery could be undone by a decision made in a war room. But watch what happened next, because it tells you everything about why this country cannot save itself. After a confrontation that shut down airports in Karachi, Lahore, and Sialkot, that battered an already fragile economy and that dragged the region to the edge of nuclear war, Pakistan did not punish anyone. It did the opposite. It promoted the man at the top. Army Chief Asim Munir was elevated to Field Marshal, the 5-star rank that only one man in Pakistan's history had ever held before him, back in 1959. A near war became a coronation, and it did not stop there. By late 2025, through a sweeping constitutional amendment, Munir was handed a brand new position, Chief of Defense Forces, giving one-man command over the Army, Navy, and Air Force for a 5-year term. The civilian government reportedly resisted, and the civilian government lost. The military had tightened its grip on the state even further, using a brush with nuclear war as the justification. So let us line up the choice Pakistan keeps making, all in one place. Guns over growth, confrontation over reform, generals over voters. Every time the country reaches a fork where it could finally choose the economy, the institutions, the future, it chooses the establishment and the fight instead. That is the stupid thing. Not one blunder. A pattern of blunders repeated for 80 years by people protecting their own power while a nation of 240 million pays for it. And with every cycle, the price of that pattern climbs higher, and the room left to fix it shrinks. Now, the part that should worry everyone, whether they have ever thought about Pakistan or not. Why this does not stay inside Pakistan's borders. Start with the nuclear reality. Pakistan sits in a permanent standoff with India, and its whole strategy leans on the threat of nuclear escalation to make up for being the weaker, poorer side. A country that is economically desperate, politically unstable, and run by an establishment that treats confrontation as a survival tool is exactly the kind of state you do not want holding a nuclear trigger. 2025 showed how fast things can spiral. The next time, the American phone call to broker a ceasefire might come too late. Now, layer the economy on top. If Pakistan ever truly defaults, the damage does not stop at its own borders. The Gulf states have poured tens of billions into propping Pakistan up in loans and deposits and deferred oil payments. A collapse would hit those creditors and rattle markets across the Muslim world. China has staked enormous infrastructure investments there. Through the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, Beijing has committed tens of billions of dollars in roads, ports, and power plants, betting on Pakistan as a strategic partner and a gateway to the Arabian Sea. A Pakistani collapse would turn that bet toxic and pull one of the world's largest economies toward the wreckage. And to the west sits Afghanistan, already broken, already a source of instability, sharing a long and porous border. When two fragile states of that size start bleeding into each other, the mess does not respect any line on a map. And a failing state with 240 million people does not fail quietly. It exports desperation, refugees, instability, and the kind of ungoverned space where extremist movements thrive and then spread outward into Afghanistan, into Central Asia, into the Gulf. And then there is the thing that is harder to measure, but just as real: the symbol. Pakistan has spent 80 years telling the Muslim world that it is the strong one, the armed guardian, the fortress. If the fortress goes bankrupt, if the guardian cannot feed its own people, if the one nuclear-armed Muslim state becomes a cautionary tale of collapse, that failure lands on the whole idea of Muslim world leadership. Rivals notice. Enemies are emboldened. The story, A Fifth of Humanity, tells about its own strength takes a hit that money cannot fix. That is why the title of this video is not just clickbait. A country this big, this armed, and this central cannot go down alone. But before we close, honesty demands a counterweight, because the truth is more complicated than any dramatic thesis. Pakistan is not doomed. It has stood on this exact ledge before and stepped back every single time. It has a young, enormous, hungry population, a real technology and textile sector, a huge diaspora sending money home, and a resilience that is genuinely remarkable. Many of its problems, a narrow tax base, energy dependence, political dysfunction, are shared by plenty of countries that are not Muslim at all. This is not about religion. It never was. It is about a governing establishment that keeps choosing its own survival over the country's. It is worth saying plainly, the 240 million people living inside this story are not the problem. They are the ones paying for it. They are among the most entrepreneurial, resilient, and generous populations on the planet. And they keep the country running despite their leaders, not because of them. The teacher in Lahore, the farmer in Sindh, the young coder in Karachi, taking on foreign clients just to earn hard currency, none of them are the ones making these decisions. They are simply the ones left holding the bill when the decisions go wrong. And the fixes are not mysterious. Tax the powerful. Shrink the military stranglehold on the economy and on politics. Let civilians actually govern. Invest in exports and education instead of arsenals and confrontation. Break the IMF cycle by finally building an economy that earns more than it borrows. None of that requires a miracle. It requires the one thing Pakistan's rulers have refused to spend for 80 years. Not money, courage. So the real question is not whether Pakistan can be saved. It obviously can. The question is whether the people who run it will ever choose the country over themselves. Because every year they do not, the stakes climb a little higher, the reserves run a little thinner, and the distance between a border clash and a catastrophe gets a little shorter. A nation was built on the promise that it would be a fortress for a fifth of the world's Muslims. 80 years later, that fortress is armed to the teeth, drowning in debt, and led by men who keep mistaking their own power for the nation's strength. History has already shown in 1971 what happens when that mistake goes unchallenged. The only real mystery left is whether anyone in charge has finally learned the lesson, or whether the whole thing has to break first and take a great deal of the Muslim world down with it.